In every election cycle, the relationship between the media and politics is put under a microscope. That's because the media is both a bedfellow and a rival to political entities. It is tasked with informing electorates while holding political actors accountable. Now, this unique tension raises questions. Is the media truly neutral? And does it inadvertently shape political outcomes? Today, we'll seek to focus on how the media can navigate this unique terrain and then look at its impact in election coverage and how it affects the broader democratic participation. And shortly, I'll let you meet our guest, who's the perfect fit for this conversation. Before that, though, let me officially welcome you to the Gender Watch podcast. I'm Regina Bole-Bote, and our guest for today is an associate professor of journalism and media studies and the director of the Research, Innovation and Development Directorate of the University of Media, Arts and Communications. He is a leading scholar in political framing in Africa. He specializes in campaign communication, political communication, and media representation. Our guest for today is none other than Professor Godwin H.A. Sikanku. Welcome, Prof, to the Gender Watch podcast.
Thank you, Regina.
I'm very happy to have you here, and it's for two reasons. Because you're not just one who speaks from a theoretical point of view, you also have that practical insight, because you've worked in the media in election years for a long time. And so I'm really looking forward to the kind of conversation we'll be having on today's episode of the Gender Watch podcast.
Thank you.
And that being said, my first question really is, why do you think there's so much attention and focus on the media during election years?
Yeah, thank you very much. And I have to say that I am very grateful for having me. And I'm also excited about all the great stuff that you're doing yourself with the Gender Podcast and with the projects that you're working on. So the media, why that much attention? I think that we proceed from the premise that in every election, people have to make decisions. And the premise of a democracy is that it's government of the people, by the people, and for the people. But then there's this expectation that people will make those decisions based on informed choices and informed positions. And one of the surefire ways to make those informed decisions or to have the right information is through the media. You know, one of the favorite things political scientists like to say about democracy is that it has to make the citizens self-governing, the idea of being self-governing. And the whole idea of self-governing is that the citizens will be in charge of determining the future of the nation and determine the future of the country. Now, if they're supposed to do that, then they need the right information, the right data, and the right resources to be able to make that information, that decision. And so information becomes a very important resource in making that decision. And there's no other better industry or institution that would help them or to equip them with that information than the media, because people cannot be at every place at the same time. And so they are going to depend on the media to transmit that information to them in order that they make that decision. So it's the self-governing principle. But also the media becomes a platform for public discourse. And so they look up to the media for intelligent and intelligible discussions that would help them to fulfill that role of being self-governing. And so if the media discourse is polarizing, if the media discourse is watered down, if the media discourse is not intelligent, if it's not intelligible, then our democracy is all the weaker because of that. And if the media misrepresents or trivializes or polarizes, then they play a very divisive role or a very destructive or deleterious role in the construction of a self-governing citizen or democracy. So Pulitzer said one thing. He said, as our press goes, so goes our democracy. So our country or a republic or a democracy rises and falls based on the kind of media that they have. And the last thing I'll say to that question, is this, and because I need to stop myself, otherwise I'll go on. But the last thing I'll say with regards to that is that, and it's very interesting, and that's why I want to throw it in. So one of the famous media scholars, said one thing, that was I to be given the choice to make the decision between a country with a newspaper and with no government, or to make the choice for a country with a government but with no newspaper or with no press, I would not hesitate to choose the former. And so he thought that having a community with that public space, with that media for public discourse and discussion, was so important than just having a government coming into with unfettered access to authority and to power. And that demonstrates the crucial importance of the press or of the media to democratic development or self-governance.
It's probably why the media is referred to as the fourth estate of the realm. But do you think that media practitioners understand that how important they are to democracy and elections in Ghana? Do we, as media practitioners, get that this role of ours is so important?
It's a good question. I hope they do, and perhaps they do, because otherwise they wouldn't be in the job or in the industry. And I think by and large, a lot of people are doing good stuff. A lot of people come into this job. When I say this job in the media, because I see myself as one sometimes or most times, they come at it with a lot of passion and with a lot of enthusiasm, with a lot of expectations, and with some level of knowledge, right? So, yeah, I do think that we have a fairly good media industry. I think we have a lot of people doing good stuff, and particularly during elections, we need to commend our media in Ghana for the very pivotal role that they play, especially in elections, not just in terms of information provision, but even serving as the last bulwark or as that last defense of democracy in terms of transparency and accountability in turning around election results or transmitting them. But I mean, there are times when you got to wonder, because of what goes on in the media space. And I think there should be a heightened or a more increased sense of that very surreal role that they occupy within the public or democratic space. The press or the media are the conscience of a nation.
Okay.
And so that leadership responsibility, that enlightenment responsibility needs to be further heightened or needs to be further entrenched, or there needs to be a lot more deeper conscientization of the media in terms of this particular leadership role, because I mean this is the last defense. If we fail, I mean there's just nothing else, to protect a citizen against demagoguery, against autocratic government, or against power or authority which is unchecked and unbalanced. And so I do think that there could be further room for improvement when it comes to that conscientization of the leadership role. Because if that is the case, then we would not see a lot of what we see sometimes.
Okay.
And probably it's also because of the era that we are in, era of new media, social media, speed, clicks,
accuracy.
Yeah, for accuracy, clicks, of course, revenue, trends, and all of that. So you find out that there is a certain evolution that the media is going through, that it compromises on some of the traditional values of what journalism is, because there is a certain predisposition towards trending. Okay, and so that affects the way in which the news is given, or the way the news is presented. So there's a lot of things that are trivialized, and some of the discussions are watered down. Also, there are political economic interests.
And we'll talk about those political economic interests, even with the issue of ownership. We'll talk about that. But since you're speaking about evolution, In your opinion, how has the media evolved in its role in covering elections? You could start from maybe 1992 when multi-party democracy started. Just help us understand from your point of view how you see the media's role evolving over the years. It's been how many elections? 8?
Yeah, eight.
This is
Seven,
probably
eight.
our
Yeah,
ninth.
yeah,
This is our ninth election.
yeah.
Yes. What has been that evolution as far as role is concerned for the media and election
Right.
coverage?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one to watch, coming from the era where we had just one media, or just a monotonous kind of media landscape. So we did have that particular era, the pre liberalization era, the pre multiplicity of media era, and we just come out of military rule. 1992, there was that wind of democracy that blew across Africa. Of course, Ghana caught the cold as well. In 92, we got to multi-party elections. But even then, private media was not as entrenched or as major as we have it now. So GTV, Ghana Broadcasting, were very central, or where they had the monopoly as far as the media landscape was concerned. But we get to 96, and I do believe that by then we had private media in Ghana, at least Joy FM and to some extent TV3 as well, but probably not as essentialized as we thought. But 2000 was really the major coming of age of the media in Ghana, at least, because by then we began to saw a lot more private radio stations, a lot more private TV stations, and we had one of the first public debates or public forums in the 2000 election. I remember there was a lot of international attention in Ghana. So that media debate, I believe I saw Charlene Hunter-Gault from CNN host one of those debates, and we do have Professor Gajepo and a couple of others do the debate at the time. So that at that time we saw the coming of age of the media in Ghana, and then we get to 2004. That was not a very dramatic election, because I mean that was the one that saw the re-election of John Kufuor. I think it looked like a foregone conclusion, so that was okay. Then we had 2008. I do think that we began to see really by this time the media's role in the election had been decided.
Okay.
It had been decided. A lot more media began to get more involved, doing public forums, sending the forums outside the radio station to the communities. There were specialized programs for elections which had begun to be held. And by 2012, we had arrived at that stage,
Okay.
as far as the role of the media was concerned. I do think that it was in 2016 that we began to see what I would call the internet election. I mean, 2016 was probably the first YouTube or the first Facebook election or the first social media election in Ghana, because politicians, actually 2012, because by 2012 there were Facebook pages for John Mahama, Facebook pages for Nana Akufo-Addo, media houses were having programs on radio and television. So it should be 2012, but it got more deepened in 2016 when you had social media play even a major role. And then by 2020, social media had gone bonkers. We began to have fake news, misinformation, disinformation actually getting heightened in this country. And now we are here in 2024, where there are huge concerns about misinformation and disinformation. The media landscape has expanded. We've seen a lot more local radio stations, a lot more politically inclined radio stations, a lot more politically inclined TV stations, and we are beginning to see an oversaturation of news and information to the general public. So there's this struggle for news and space, which means that the media houses outcompete themselves in terms of who does the most dramatic or the most ridiculous things to be able to capture public attention. But as much as that has been the downfall, I think the upside to it is that we've had a lot more rich programming as well. The idea of beat reporting has become very entrenched in Ghanaian media. So you have media houses sending their media guys to follow campaigns, to report on them. We have specialized programming. There are more opportunities for people to air their views on radio, television, and even on the internet. And then we have instant reportage, a lot of live coverage as well. So I do think that the media has occupied its role or its position as the fourth estate in our country's democracy.
Okay, you've mentioned misinformation, disinformation going into election 2024. In the previous election 4 years ago, it was an issue. Do you feel that the levels have increased now? Because now we have social media, chat GPT, we have sites that are able to clone, even create fake stuff. How much of a threat is it for the media, traditional media now, to stay in line, be accurate, deliver objective news and not be swayed?
Yeah, I think it's an existential threat. I think the threat is heightened and is extreme because it is now out of the hands of the media. Even the citizens themselves are part of that process of media production. Citizen journalism, we now have the blogosphere, we have podcasts, a lot of people doing podcasts themselves, even the political parties. So the threats to free, fair, accurate information is even further heightened. But the sad part of it is that the media should be that check. Unfortunately, it looks like they become culprits or they become instruments or valves or mechanisms through which this particular disinformation is passed through. So, I mean, it's kind of embarrassing, but this misinformation and disinformation is actually perpetuated by the media sometimes, or they do fall victim to some of this misinformation and disinformation. So that is why there is the need for every media house to have a fact-checking desk, to have a research desk, to have a misinformation policy, to have a social media policy, so that they do not fall victim to some of this misinformation or disinformation or fake news that is passed around during election era.
Do you necessarily believe that it's about media partitions falling victim to such fake news, or as much of it is being a decision to put out such fake news for an intended effect? And I'm asking this because of the issue of ownership of these media houses, political ownership of these media houses, where a particular media organization is there to serve the interest of a particular politician. So I will put out this information even if I know it is not true, so far as it serves the interest of my paymaster.
Right. I think it goes both ways. There's no doubt that some of it is because of the lack of verification and all of that. But hey, I mean, there are a lot of political undertones to some of the media houses that we have, and some of them have become appendages or voices for some of the political ideologies that they belong to, at least, if not officially, but unofficially. So I do think it goes both ways.
How much of what we are seeing now, politicians owning media houses, is affecting the quality of the media in terms of its coverage, independent, objective coverage of our elections?
Oh, it's a major problem. I mean, I would hope that it wouldn't become the norm. Okay.
Has it not become the norm?
I mean, it's pervasive, but in terms of the issuing of licenses and all of that, I'm just hoping that that doesn't become the criteria, for issuing of licenses. Because other than that, then we have a very diluted space. But yeah, it definitely is a problem, because when that happens, it denies us the opportunity to have the balance that we need, to have the very objective reportage that we need in order to have very interesting and rich quality debates in the media. Because of course, if those imperatives come in, I mean, you can be sure that it will just exist to perpetuate a particular one side or one angle of it, and then that denies us the opportunity to have a more balanced and mixed angle. So, I mean, it's just doesn't lead to a more I just think it's more interesting if we have the kind of vigorous debate that we need in every democracy. So there's room for that, okay, but it just shouldn't become the major feature of our media landscape.
So for you, you think that even as we progress as an industry, as a sector, there should be those checks that would, and not necessarily cut down on the number of politicians who are getting these licenses to own media houses. That's not what. That's not what
So
you're doing.
it includes that.
Okay.
Yeah, it should also include a certain check that your proximity to political power should not become the sine qua non or the essential factor that determines whether you have that license or not. That's what I'm saying.
How do you think the media has played its role when it comes to agenda setting in election years?
Agenda setting.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, I know people see a lot about agenda setting and they like to throw around that term a lot.
Okay.
But you know, I don't take that lightly.
Okay.
Yeah, the agenda setting stuff.
But do you believe the media has a role to set the agenda?
Do they have a role to set the agenda?
Okay.
To an extent, and that's why I'm saying I don't take that very lightly at all, because some people misconstrue that to say that the media can push their own interests within the public domain. But the agenda setting role of the media is also tied to the social responsibility role of the media at the same time. So agenda setting, to the extent that the media plays a certain forthright and leadership role in setting the agenda for issues that are concerned with the public interest, then yes. But the reason why I paused to answer this is that when some people talk about agenda setting, it's almost as if it is a certain carte blanche and free space by the media to push certain parochial and certain, self-serving interests. That agenda should be an agenda that serves the public interest. And so to that extent, yes, there is a certain agenda setting rule if and only if that agenda setting rule is guided by the public interest duty of the media. Because what that then means is that they have to be attuned to the problems within the communities. They have to be attuned to the issues that are concerned with the public. And so they got to set that agenda by calling the attention of the office holders to it. After all, the reason why the media are there is to make ordinary issues and everyday issues compelling enough so that those issues are addressed. So to that extent, yes, they do have an agenda setting role. But it does not mean at the same time that when you go to the blogging world, there's a whole new definition for that. To set agenda, let's set agenda.
Okay.
And that means that
that is on the streets of X or Twitter.
Yes. And some of the media houses are guilty of that too. Which means, and you know what that means in that world? It means that let us do our own idiosyncratic, our own partisan, our own politicized, our own polarized self-interest. Let's go out there and set it up. And if that means destroying people, if that means promoting a certain negative, wrong, prejudiced, slanted interests and issues, however, we are going to put, as far as it serves our interests, we are going to put it out there. That is the kind of agenda that I'm saying is destructive to our democracy.
So here's why I asked that question. Because we do know that our election years, in fact, not just election years, normally a lot of the conversations on radio and television is politics. It's tuned towards two main political parties arguing, debating, you've done this, I've done that. And then the very core issues that affect the well-being of the people, sensitive gender issues, for instance, are relegated to the background. That is why I asked that question, that has it played that role in terms of bringing to the fore all the issues that matter to the population in election years?
Yeah. No, it's a very important question. And there's
especially for gender issues.
Especially for gender issues. And I'm happy you asked that, because I think there's too much partisanship, when it comes to not just the politics, but the media as well. I think the standard operating rule of practice, standard operational whatever practice for most media houses, is to get on every issue NPP and DC or two major political whatever party representatives to come and discuss it. But some issues are beyond partisanship. Some issues are beyond politics. Issues of health, issues of mortality, issues of gender, issues of religion and ethnicity, issues that have to do with life and death issues, people's identity, people's self-actualization. Those issues go beyond partisanship. And I think that is where there's the concern. Because if there's COVID-19 and you want to bring a political person to come and talk about COVID-19, that undermines or underserves the march towards addressing a public health emergency. When it comes to gender, for instance, there is a lot of concern about the participation, the adequate, not just participation, but I will even qualify it, quality participation by females in politics, and even representation of those in the political space. The research has shown that the more we have women involved in politics, the more we have gender balance in politics, certain social issues come to the forefront. And the way in which the manner and form in which those issues are discussed, the quality of those discussions are heightened or are increased when we have that kind of balanced and expanded inclusion in the discussion of those issues. And so I think that there should be a more conscious effort to discuss such issues, because reproductive rights and certain core health issues that have to do with people's self-empowerment are very essential if we are supposed to build a certain kind of society or a certain kind of future. How is it that we have an election and all the discussions do not have a certain gender-based angle to it? I don't care what issue it is, whether it's the internet, whether it's technology, whatever it is. In what way have those issues affected the gender gap or the gender dynamics in the country? For me, that is what we should be looking at. So you cannot have that discussion to see and not see how that is manifested within the gender dynamics. Because even when you talk about artificial intelligence, you talk about internet, you talk about technology, digitization, and all of that, who are those who have the access? Who are those who are more likely to use it to perpetrate the same sort of misogyny and the same sort of prejudice that we have in society? So for me, I think that there is a lack of conscientization in terms of how we look at the way in which major issues in elections are manifested from a gender perspective. And that is where there needs to be a lot more effort to consciously set the agenda from that perspective.
To what extent do you think the Ghanaian media has been neutral in election years? I hope this doesn't put you in a tough spot.
No, it's okay. I mean, it's
to
fine.
What extent?
Yeah, I mean, we got to be concerned about this stuff, right? Because at the end of the day, we are here to serve the public interest. Neutral, to what extent? I think by and large, we've seen some media houses do some good job. Some of the big media houses threw up some good programming. Election time is very big. People go out there to launch election programming content There are specialized programs that are done. People from diverse areas are brought in to come and discuss content and all of that. And I think we just had the election, the GG Awards. I mean, we saw some people do some really good stuff out there. So I think that there's an effort to remain neutral. There's an effort. I don't even know if neutral is a word, but balanced.
Okay.
You know, to be balanced and objective. We have some really educative programs on radio and TV. And of course, this podcast is one of them to help educate people. So I think that's fine. But yeah, every now and again, I mean, you do find that there's a lot of a lot of subjective talk on radio and television. Some personal opinion is passed as official information. Some of the issues are read off the internet, and some of it is like just wrong information which is taken from the internet and just put out there. There's a lot of mockery, you know, when it comes to some topics, especially when it comes to gender-based topics. You know, there's a lot of unserious treatment of those kind of topics and insensitivity when it comes to those discussions. So I think that there's a lot of work to be done when it comes to professionalizing or cleaning the sector.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's not a one cup fits all.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I know we've talked about politicians owning media organizations. And for this question that you just answered, there are those who believe that the media ownership impacts the impartiality or otherwise of the media. I'm sure you agree with that.
Oh yeah, I do.
Okay. And hopefully, like you're saying, we would have or get to that point where we're not seeing so many of these politically owned media organizations. Let's talk about how the media has been accountable for the gaps or maybe misinformation, for instance. So the excesses of its election coverage. Do you think that media organizations hold themselves to account, or do they necessarily just shift the blame and put it on others? Because like you're saying, like it or not, it's happening.
Yeah.
Journalists day in, day out are falling victim to fake news here and there. How much of that introspection, accountability, does the Ghanaian media have?
I think we'd like to see a lot more of it because most of the time the attention that is given to correcting such flips or or such gaps is not as much as it should be. We've seen in the last election some people just get it downright wrong, in terms of transmitting the election numbers or the election figures. And I think some humility is needed in making sure that the public knows that this information that is coming is not sacrosanct, that they are not the be all and the end all of the information that is being provided, and that there should be that disclaimer that is issued so that the public know within which context to place the information that they are getting. But then by and large too, you realize that for some reason the programming and also the nature of the people who come to the political discussions, the appropriation of the kind of the diversity of the sources that come there are also a problem, because you realize there's a certain contraction of the space of sources. They go to the same people for the same information all the time. And I don't think there's an attempt. I mean, there's some of the past research that I saw said that only about 10% of females are part of political panels, or the paneling or panelists or panels. When it comes to political discussions, and even more so when it comes to the issues that are discussed. So I do think that there's just a narrowing of that space when it comes to that kind of representation, and a lot more can be done in terms of expanding the diversity and representation of voices.
Okay.
When it comes to
In terms of accountability, to that question that I just asked, how would you rate or assess the regulators, the media commissions, NCA, GIBA, for instance? How have they played their role in holding the various media organizations accountable for misinformation, disinformation, and biased reporting, especially during election years?
Yeah, I do think that the NMC, for instance, in some few cases involving TV3 and some others, were quite proactive in rather issuing out statements or guidelines, and at some point they also went ahead to pursue some legal action, because on paper they do not have those punitive measures. So I think today's NMC has been quite proactive. The NCA will tell you that they are restricted in what they can do. So maybe the laws need to be looked at. The broadcasting bill really needs to be one that also needs to be looked at. The media organizations themselves need to also be more proactive in making sure that they whip their members into line. But I think our regulatory space, it's still growing, and and so there's still a lot of things that could be checked in a better way than it is now. As at this time, it looks like that is not being done.
As we prepare for election 2024,
even as we prepare for election 2024, or even just generally, I don't think that we have a very strong regulatory regime. I think there needs to be a real look at the laws that have established those regulatory bodies in order to give them teeth to be able to bite. And for now, a lot of it just falls on either individuals or organizations pursuing civil action or pursuing whatever actions in the legal courts or remedies in order to hold whichever journalist that they think has misrepresented or whatever accountable. But beyond those measures, there could be a stronger media regulatory regime. But also, a lot of it also has to come from the media houses themselves, in terms of the values that guide the work they do, in terms of the the self checks that they have among the journalists themselves, a lot of the training, and even the kind of people that are allowed to sit behind the console. Yeah, I think the media houses themselves should do a better job at that, to make sure that it's just the best and the brightest who have the opportunity to sit there and to do that job, and not just because we want the clicks or we want the fame and all of that. So it comes from both sides, both in terms of the push factor and the pull factor.
As we wrap up, and before we wrap up, I have one question. Do you see some tension between political actors and media practitioners in election years? And do you know why I'm asking that? No. Because even now, there's so many times when media organizations put out stories, and if it doesn't favor one political party, they're branded.
Okay.
So you do a story, and then instantly followers of the political party that the story is against will brand you.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think what we are seeing now is a lot more people, I don't know what to call it, but the political culture in Ghana is becoming further heightened or entrenched, so much so that everybody or most people now have a very good sense, or have begun to have a very good sense of where they belong within the political divide. And so for them, it's just the normal politics that they are doing. But for the media houses themselves, I think it's a professional job that they are also trying to do. So I think where the gap is, or where we need to bring everything to the middle, is a lot more education on both sides, both the political actors and the media actors. I do think that the whole division and polarization that we are seeing in our political space is something that has to be addressed. The need for political civility, the need for decency, the need for decorum in our politics is something that should go both ways, because when and a lot more media literacy, because when that is done, the political actors who perpetuate sometimes harm the journalists, sometimes target them, target their families, and all of that. A lot of that would be reduced, because then they do understand the job that the media is trying to do. On the other hand, the media itself also has to take steps to protect its journalists, and also to make sure that they are not just going out there to pursue very parochial interests of that are ideologically leading or propagandistic in itself. So I think there is a need for the elevation of political discourse. There's a need for the practice of high politics instead of low politics. There's a need for the entrenchment of good values that we have in our democracy. And once we follow those principles, once we follow those values, I think our democracy would be for the better. And we can understand that two of us can disagree, but it does not mean that we are enemies. We can have different opinions, but we don't take it personal. And we can have a decent debate and a decent discussion and still leave without going out there to be at each other's throat or try to pursue people and harm them in whatever way possible. I think that is the next level that our nation, our country needs to get to, because it can get very nasty a lot of times online, on social media, offline. It really can get degenerative, and that is not who we are. I mean, at every election, there are concerns about war, about conflict, about peace. The Peace Council has to come out, issuing several statements. There is always that fear of what is going to happen after the election. I think that we're too mature. We've come a long way in our democracy for that. We need to move beyond that. And for that, it's political education, political literacy, and media literacy on the side of all the stakeholders, the citizens, the media, and the political actors themselves. That is the only way that we can promote our democracy and leave a good legacy for those who come after us. Many young people are watching, many young people are observing, and we all have that responsibility to make sure that we are a good example for them.
This could pass as a closing remark, perfect, but at the risk of making you not say any final words, I'm still going to ask you, going into the elections, what recommendations, advice would you give to media practitioners as far as covering the elections is concerned?
Yeah, I think there should be a lot of caution as to how they report these elections. There are a lot of things that we should know or we should do during elections. Making sure that we don't use language that debases people, the fact that we don't use labels or terms that tend to prejudice a certain group of people. That is very important. The level of language that we use on radio and television or even online is one. I also think that the media houses need to beef up their research desks so that we have a lot more issue-based discussions. We should also move beyond the partisanship as well. And there should be a certain diversity in the sources that are used for the political discussions and for political coverage. Because some of the sources are just overbeaten, overflocked, sources, and people tune out. I've met people who say that once they start a discussion, they hear this person, they just tune off because they know what's going to happen. I think we can do better. We can serve the public a lot more better than that. So it got to be citizen based. It got to be public interest based. And when we do that, most people who sit back would appreciate the role of the media even more, and the politicians will respect the kind of work that we do as well.
Thank you very much, Professor H.S. Kanku.
Thank you very much. It was good to be with you.
Yeah, so Professor H.S. Kanku is an Associate Professor of Journalism and Media Studies, also the Director of Research, Innovation and Development Directorate at the University of Media, Arts and Communications. He's been my guest on today's episode of the Gender Watch podcast brought to you by the Aya Institute of Women, Politics and Media. I hope you've learned a thing or two. Until next time, thank you so much. I'm Regina Boliboti.